Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey guys, back again in this marathon session of One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, trying to answer some of your questions about the art of distillation, be it home distilling or professional distilling. As always, check out oldhomesteaddc.com and keep an eye on that place because that is my new place, my new distillery, and lots of cool things coming out there. Tasting room is unofficially open now if you want to come in and taste things. Now, we're not doing tours of the distillery yet, but that is coming. Also, of course, thealchemistcabinet.com, where you can buy the 2025 Almanac, Practical Distiller's Almanac. It's only available digitally right now, but physical copies will be going up here very, very shortly. As soon as I have them in my hand and I can ship them out to you, and those of you who have already ordered them will obviously get yours first. So, thanks for all your support all the time and everything that we do here. Whether it be here, Distillers Talk, if you have ghosts, you have everything. Whatever I do that you're into. Thank you for supporting me. I really, really appreciate it. I love what I do. Very passionate about what I do, obviously. Even if sometimes I get a little drugged down, it takes me a little while to dig back out of the hole. But I do absolutely love it. So, from Chase. Hello, Alan. It's Chase again. I want to start by thanking you for the unbelievably in-depth answer you gave me on Maryland Rye Whiskey. I can't thank you and Laura enough. You're very welcome. I have watched every apple brandy video you have. I have dabbled in distilling brandy and have read quite a bit about how the French make brandy or calvados. I try to make authentic brandy and do not sugar any of my brandy. Not that I'm against it, but my aim is to pull as much apple flavor as possible. And from what I have read, sugar is counterproductive to that aspect. So far, I have essentially been making hard cider and using cider yeast than distilling it. However, I can't help but wonder from watching the multitude of videos you have on apple brandy if I couldn't be pulling more flavor somehow. I saw a prior video you made and you said that the varieties of apples similar to a Honeycrisp are not ideal for a brandy due to the fact that they are in a lot of ways a big ball of water. I think that I am tasting that in my final product. Most of the orchards around me are pressing their seconds and are pressing a lot of their leftover apples because they can't get rid of them due to the orchard industry going downhill. I'm not against pressing my own apples and want to know what varieties of apples commercially are the best or better for a brandy. The next part of my question is, what are some ways I can pull more flavor in your opinion? Should I be introducing the actual meat of the apples into my ferment, or should I abandon the cider only theory as a whole and try making traditional apple mash? If I recall correctly, you recommended Golden Delicious on a video in the past. I am curious what other varieties of commercial apples would be your recommendation. Thanks in advance. I do not want to over-ask questions, and I know you have covered apple brandy quite extensively. I also know that morel season is coming, and I wanted to catch you before that. Anyone who has ran into a big patch of mushrooms under a dying elm or an ash tree knows that that comes before anything this time of year. You're correct. In fact, I went mushroom hunting earlier, but no luck yet. I think it was about the 8th of April last year before I found anything. We're sitting at the 7th right now, so this week hopefully we're going to come up with some morels. That's what I'm hoping for, man. So I'm knocking out some videos tonight. So good call. And you're not going to over ask questions. Please, no one ever feel like you're over asking questions. It may take me a little while to get to your questions. I may even miss them sometimes, but I will get to them. So yes, when it comes to commercial apples, Golden Delicious is about the best on the market when it comes to being able to make an apple brandy from what you're going to find at the store. Basically, most of your culinary apples are not going to make very good brandy. And even Golden Delicious doesn't make great brandy. Let's be fair. Golden Delicious makes a great base brandy, right? Something that is drinkable of its own accord, but would be better if it were blended in with other apples, either in the fermentation or potentially post-distillation, post-maturation. But it is a fantastic base. A lot of your modern apples are way too watery. They're not nearly aromatic enough, etc. And finding a good orchard that has things like Northern Spy, any traditional cider apples is very, very worthwhile. But barring being able to find that, Golden Delicious is a good go-to. And here's an easy cheat. So all those apples that don't have phenomenal fermented, distilled flavor and aroma can still be used, and you can still make a really, really great apple brandy with them in a few different ways. And so I'm going to stick to this for my answer on this one because I think it would be the easiest way to show you a cool little trick. So first and foremost, I would always recommend making a true Hoosier style apple mash brandy, and that is actually using the entirety of the apple. Now, if you want to grind up your own apples and do it that way, it takes a lot of apples. You want to use as many apples as what you can. And now I don't know what your still setup is, so I don't know if you can put those solids in there, but if you can put the solids in the still, that's what you need to do with apple mash brandy. If you can't do that, just stick with doing juice or ciders or whatever. But if you can get some solids into your still, for sure, or into a thumper, for example, then making an apple mash brandy, in my opinion, is the way to go. If you are going to use sugar, I would use some brown sugar, and I wouldn't capitalize a whole lot, but just enough to make it at least worth your while, right? Brown sugar has some nice contrast with some of those golden delicious notes that isn't offensive at all and still has a lot of that apple sort of context to it in particular. You can even, when you do an apple mash brandy, take some cider or even some commercial apple juice and use that instead of water. Now, whatever that base is that you use, and, presuming that you're using, Golden Delicious, and the vast majority of your apple juice out there, your Mott's apple juice and stuff, that's mostly going to be Golden Delicious. Once you get your fermentation done and you do your distillation, I don't know if you're doing a single pass, double pass, what you're doing, but always remember, you can throw fresh apples into a thumper, or you can cut fresh apples and put them into a gin basket. You can do a single pass and do it this way, or you can do a double pass and even do a Geist, right? So you already have apple brandy. Now you're adding some raw apples back into the spirit, macerating those for an amount of time, and then redistilling it to pull that much more flavor. What I like to do is a double pot still distillation. So I will take my apple mash brandy, I will distill that one time. That'll go back into the still, and then I put a gin basket, preferably with a bypass on it so I can get rid of the heads first on the second run. And then open that gin basket up on whatever apples I like the flavor and the aroma of. And this includes some of those apples that don't ferment well. So I've done this many times with Honeycrisp and other apples of that nature, where I've taken them and cut them fresh, put them into a gin basket and redistilled, or cut them, dried them, put the dried apples in the gin basket and redistilled it, and pulled some amazing and incredible flavors and mouthfeel and textures across. After this, one thing that Wayne does at Ozark Stillworks, and one thing that I like to do, and I've actually been doing this at Old Homestead with our apple spirit. We don't call it an apple brandy. We are going to do some apple brandies. It is an apple spirit, a Black Forest spirit, which is a traditional apple mash brandy that's been chapitalized. And then after distillation, post-distillation, which, by the way, I do fill the thumpers up with fresh apples when I do this as well on that particular spirit, along with the mash itself. But we take that distilled spirit, and then I dry down a bunch of modern culinary apples, and then macerate those in the distillate for a couple of weeks prior to proofing and bottling. And that gives us a really nice flavor, really nice aroma, really nice mouthfeel. So that's a little cheat that you can kind of put in your book and use potentially in the future to improve your existing apple brandy. Really, it's all about having a nice mix of apples. And it's not to say that you can't use a lot of those other culinary apples. It's just that they're not ideal for that, right? You'd be better off using apple crabs and crab apples, wild apples growing in people's yards. Whatever you can find growing in somebody's yard around where you're at probably will make decent stuff when it's mixed with other apples. So that's something to consider for sure. So I hope that helped you out there, man. Let's see. So Randy. Okay. Sometimes I have to look these over before I start reading them and trying to answer them, because sometimes I got to let my brain load a little bit. But hey, Alan, as always, thanks for answering all our questions and all you do to advocate the craft of home and small batch distilling. You're welcome, brother. Looks like I scorched my first whiskey wash. This was an all malt wash that I fermented and distilled on the grain, which I have done successfully several times up to this point. However, in the past, I've only included about 1/2 to 2/3 of the grain, straining the fermented wash out of the remainder of the grains. So this was a thicker wash with extra grains that I've used in the past. I failed to consider how much of the liquid would evaporate out during distillation. I've been there, brother. Next time, since I have a sight glass in the lid of my kettle that I can easily remove, I believe I could cut the power about halfway through the stripping run and add more water to the kettle to help prevent scorching, as well as adding more water at the start, room permitting. Your thoughts on this, please? I don't know why it wouldn't work, I guess, is what I would say. It makes sense to me. I mean, it's going to add some time to your run and make sure that you do it safely, obviously, but I don't know why it wouldn't work. It's an interesting concept for sure. Keep me up to date on that if you do try that, but please be very careful doing that. Unfortunately, at the time, I was draining the distillate into a large bucket without cuts, as this was a stripping run running at 100% power, and quite a bit of foul or bad distillate got into the whole batch. I noticed that it had turned the distillate. Okay, so you're running on elements. It turned the distillate about 3 gallons at this point cloudy. I immediately diverted the distillate into a jar before cutting the power so I could compare the whole 3 gallons with the uncut bad distillate. The bad distillate doesn't seem to have a foul smell, but tastes very acrid and bitter. Yep, absolutely. No mistaking that. However, the tainted 3 gallons doesn't taste too bad, but I do pick up some of the bitterness that I get in the foul or bad distillate. Slight, but not near as bitter as the bad distillate. My plan for the stripping run was to combine it with 2 or 3 other stripping runs for a spirit run, but I'm not sure I want to risk ruining the other runs. Another thought I had was to possibly treat or filter the tainted 3 gallons using some charcoal before doing a spirit run without any other stripping runs to reduce the risk of ruining any of the other runs, but I'm not sure if this would help either. What are your thoughts on either of these ideas? I did do a search on YouTube to see if you had discussed this before, but I couldn't find anything. I'd rather dump the tainted spirit rather than risk the quality of a whole spirit run, especially since this will be going into my Solera bad mode barrels. So there's a lot of risk here, as I don't want to reduce or ruin the overall quality of the whole Solera. I look forward to hearing what you have to say, considering I have so much at stake. If you think it's worth it, I'll send you a small sample of the tainted spirit so you can assess if it's worth trying to save. Again, thanks so much for helping me with my dilemma. Randy, I'm glad to help, man. Listen, I think that generally, and because you do know what you're doing, you've been doing this for a good little while, usually your gut instinct is a correct instinct. And I would highly encourage you not to try to include this in your spirits runs. I won't encourage you to dump it, though, because depending on how badly scorched it is, there may be possibilities here. Scorch is pretty hard to take out, but let me just throw you an old rectifier's trick where you might be able to save some spirit out of this to use for something. Not for what you're currently wanting to use it for, but for something. So you're on the right track with the carbon filtering, the charcoal filtering. If you had a good tight packed filter with actual carbon to run that stuff through, run it through that. Once you're done doing that, if you have other things you can redistill it with, or you get enough volume that it makes it worthwhile to run it in your still, right? Once you put that in your still, add some charcoal to your still. Some, hardwood charcoal, sugar maple, whatever you got, and rerun the distillation with that charcoal in your still. So that's an old school rectifier's trick that they used to use at some of the big distilleries that did rectification. So they were buying from farm distillers, right? Farm distillers are in a hurry. A lot of them don't necessarily know what they're doing. So a lot of bad scorched whiskey comes through these old rectifying plants in the 1800s. And one of the ways that they would treat all that bulked up whiskey that they'd bought that they knew needed redistilled was they would put it back in the still with a bunch of charcoal and redistill it. And I've done this several times, and I've done it with some scorched stuff. And you're not going to make a beautiful, perfect, grand spirit, but a lot of times you can pull a usable spirit back out of that to use for something else. So bear that in mind. Very, very rarely are there spirits that have been destroyed to such an extent that they are unusable for something or unrectifiable in some way, shape, or form. They may not fit the bill for what you planned on doing, but they can be used somewhere. All right, guys. Appreciate y'all. Love you. Later.